Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today, I spoke to somebody that you might know, whether you realise it or not. If you know who Remington Steele is, if you know who Xena the Princess Warrior is, or maybe you're a fan of the Rock films, maybe you know who Kevin Costner is. So, what if I told you, today I was talking to R.J. Stewart, who has been a writer on many of those films, programs, and has worked with all of the people I've mentioned. But today we are talking about Crazy Hawk, his new book. I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I loved talking to him. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Despite the fact we've been chatting for nearly 20 minutes anyway. How are you?
Good. I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. I get caught out because I feel like I should do these formal introductions for the benefit of the podcast. But you and I have been chatting away, and then I had to remember that, oh, actually, I haven't started the podcast yet. But we were having a good chat about how much I actually love America and just where you and
it was great to hear. It was great to hear. I'm with you. I mean, there are two extremes in America. There are people that are, like you mentioned, hypercritical of the country. They don't appreciate what they have. But on the other side, there are people who are blindly, flag waving maniacs. So,
they are. To be fair, they're my kind of people. They really are. I love.
No, I think I'm more sympathetic to them than the ones that see all the negative. I just don't.
I would say I sit in terms of me as an individual. I'd probably sit around the middle, but leaning towards the flag raving nutters. But they would definitely be my favourite company.
Yeah, I'm there too. We went down. Our great grandson is living with us, and we went down and put up the. Yesterday was the 4th, and we went down and put up the American flag.
Yeah,
at the front of.
Yes. So I would be the sort of person I can happily stand for your national anthem and appreciate it. I don't need to cry.
I do too.
I don't need to have tears coming down my face and an image of a bald eagle flying over me. But I would stand and appreciate it with you.
Yeah. No, I'm all there. It's interesting that at ball games, baseball games in particular, the national anthem's a pretty big deal. I mean, it's in it football games too, but it's more of a performance at a football game. Yeah. Whereas just somebody strolls in a baseball game, just somebody strolls out to the home plate and sings the national anthem. It's kind of.
I love it. I honestly
always means something to me. I always play ball afterwards.
Yeah. See, I genuinely love it, and my feelings on this are like you say, when people are hypercritical, you just know you've never travelled, because there isn't a country in the world that doesn't have its problems. They all do.
Exactly.
Right? But if you can't just and here's another one that bothers me, because not exclusively, but 99 times out of 10, if you have a problem with, say, you live in the States, it's because you were born there and you never had to get out of another country. Okay. And if you can't just appreciate your flag and appreciate the national anthem and what it means, because you live in one of the safest countries in the world. And like I said, I'm gonna be careful that I don't go into a massive rant about how people don't appreciate it. But it's trying to explain to people that the reason you can have these opinions is because you live in America. Because if you had them in some countries, you wouldn't be alive tomorrow.
Yeah, you're preaching to the converted. I'm totally on board there.
But I feel like I've got that off my chest now. So
good.
And we should actually get on to the reason that you and I have been connected. And firstly, thank you. I do appreciate your time. But I wanted to go back to something we were saying before I started recording, because it's an interesting concept about writing. And you were telling the story about the cat in the wall. Could you just repeat that, what we were talking about?
Yeah, I mentioned that I have family that come from of a suburb. Well, it was once a village. Now it's sort of a suburb of Warrington. It was once upon a time a village called Grappenhall. And in there, I have relatives in that cemetery. But in the church that's associated with that town is there's above the church door is an engraving of a cat, and no one knows why it's there. You don't usually see cats right above the door. And the cat is kind of got a funny look on his face. I won't go so far as to say it's a smile, but it's an odd look. And supposedly, uh, uh, Lewis Carroll saw that cat, and that's why he wrote why he put the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. So it inspired the Cheshire Cat. And you were saying that that's everywhere in England.
What it is yeah, the history of weird things is definitely everywhere in the UK and Europe. But the thing that fascinated me about this, and this is leading towards you, it's that ability that writers have to see something and it takes them off in their own story. And it can literally be an inanimate object, an engraving on a wall. And they turn that into, it's an integral part of the Alice in Wonderland story. Without it, what sort of story
Well,
do you have?
this will dovetail both of our conversations, both are how beautiful America is, and the point you're making. I've lived in this valley where I live now, and it was in San Diego County, in the mountains in San Diego County, for 20 years, and I love it. I love the geography of it. I love the people. I love everything about it, and in setting a story in this valley, at least part of the story takes place in this valley, was something that definitely stimulated me. And when I would ride horses a lot in this valley, I had horses for 20 years. Last one passed in 2021. But riding along is, stimulated my imagination to, I want to capture this in a book. And that was one of the inspirations for writing a novel.
Well, because that's a good point, isn't it? Because how, like you say, is you're in the valley, and for people that aren't really aware, California was effectively the gold rush in films and in literature. How true
Yeah.
any of it is, from California all the way to Texas to Montana, and crossing that whole from east to west, and this is what I love about the human imagination, is when you look at the reality of landing in New York, somehow going cross trail, it must have been appalling. It must have been shit. And we've got so many stories, so many adventures, an entire culture built around it being the greatest ever time in history. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're just like, no. If you look at the history of how many people just died trying to do it, and
Well, just that cross country thing where they usually get a wagon in St. Louis and
yeah,
and get all their supplies there, and then set out, and next stop, California or Oregon or wherever they're going, and those tales are epic and almost hard to believe. But just doing this is like I'm reading a book. Not I come from. My dad was stationed in Arizona. My dad was in the Air Force, and he was stationed in Arizona for about 7 years when I was a kid. I really got into Arizona history, and just the idea of in the 1880s to ride from Tucson to Tombstone. That's about 150 miles. I told you I rode for 20 years. I consider myself like a hero if I do a 20-mile round trip, in one day. And these guys would cover that was what they did. Okay, you're going to go to Tucson? Yeah, I'm going to mount up and ride a horse there. We take those kind of things for granted. It's one of the things I wanted to capture in the book when I had a society that travels on horseback and with wagons. I wanted to capture the wonderful nature of a horse society, but also the grueling nature of it.
It
It's
is
very challenging.
because on one hand we can imagine it to be very much Little House on the Prairie, and
Yeah,
with the late Michael Landon, but it's not how it. Because I mean, I to be fair, I haven't ridden a horse since I was a child. So, I mean, how far would somebody on average be able to ride a horse?
yeah, that's an excellent question. I did a fair amount of research on it. Comfortably, you could do 25 miles a day. Certainly, cavalry used to do false forced marches of 40 miles a day. That would really be pushing the horses. The So I'd say comfortably, so you don't have burnout horses. If And I read that what they would try to do is rest the horse every third day or something, like, so they
Yeah,
go to try to stop at a town so the horses could rest a day. Now, in my book, I have Deirdre, the main character, is doing these long rides, but that doesn't necessarily make for great reading, the long rides. So I would exaggerate. I probably had her doing 40 miles a day in her rides. Uh, just I fictionalized it.
yeah.
But yeah,
The
I'd
great
say
Hollywood
25 miles.
story. We're going to fictionalize this.
But I just told you about that trip from Tucson to Tombstone. There's a famous thing where Wyatt Earp took Curly Bill up to Tucson for a trial or something, and they only spent one night camping out. So they did 150 miles in 2 days. So,
Because I'd imagine though there would be because I guess and I have to be upfront. I have no knowledge of this, so I'm just assuming how things must work. But you must have had like a type of horse, a breed of horse that was good for plodding along every day and could tow a wagon or carry a person and supplies and just plod along every day for sort of 20, 30 miles. And it was good for that. But then you must have
yeah.
had horses that were good for sort of just a canter, could over a few days crack out 75 miles a day sort of thing.
Yeah, the terminology that we use today, at least in 19th century America, there's only two breeds that I have stumbled across being referred to in, like, talk about Tombstone or the East Coast, are Arabs and thoroughbreds. What we call the gaited horses, the Missouri Fox Trotters, the Tennessee Walkers and stuff, they were definitely there, but they didn't have a breed name. They were just called the gaited horses.
Yeah.
And as far as I could tell, I haven't researched it systematically, but and the reason for that, and this is true of dogs too, that when they're still being bred for the most effective purpose, people aren't worried that too much about breeds,
No.
So like, might put a little Arab blood in this wine and crossbreed it with a thoroughbred, and now we have very specific breeds of both dogs and horses. And
it was its infancy as well, though, wasn't it? Because it was for that purpose, and there's probably a valid argument that the kind of the whole thing from it sort of started off in the sort of early 1800s, I guess, and it was kind of over by the 1900s. So it never had a chance to establish itself over generations and generations, where you got a large enough pool of horses that proved this was the best way to go forward.
Very good point. My grandfather, James Stewart, born in County Tyrone in Ireland. When he came to New York, he worked as a groom, which I did my research. What he did was his brother Willie was a driver, and they did deliveries in a wagon with a horse-drawn wagon. And in the groom, and you don't think about this, but you see in the movies that somebody just ties off the horse and runs into a building or something. you can't have horses running away while you're in delivering
Yeah.
ice. They had to deliver ice, so they had to go upstairs with the ice and stuff. So one person would go take the ice up, and which in one building you might have 4 or 5 deliveries, and then somebody else stayed with the horse. And that was my grandfather for a while, and then he evolved into being a driver. And according to my dad, when my dad was born in 1920, so he saw there was still horse-drawn wagons around in the 1920s. He saw some as a kid when he would go around with his dad. By then, his dad had transferred to driving a truck, but his dad was very sensitive to how the horses were being handled, and said that's wrong. You can't leave a horse like that and stuff. So it's
So wonderful
so
generation.
so it lasted into the earlier 20th century, but by the 1930s, it was totally gone.
But it's your grandfather's generation and your father's generation were an incredible generation because they really saw that kind of transition of technologies.
Yeah,
I don't know about for you, but for me, I learnt about them, and and I saw the evolution of cars and lorries and trucks, but they actually went from the ox, the horse, to a motorized vehicle, and you know, I
airplanes.
yeah
When my dad was a little kid, he told me, he says he was flying an airplane was either something for stunt people or rich people.
yeah
The idea that when by the time I was born in the that you could fly across country, you could just pay money and jump on an airplane, go across country was unthinkable when he was a kid,
yeah
uh, as well as television and all the
yeah
modern.
for sure. But when I think of popular culture, America for the 60s and the 70s and the 80s for air travel, it was kind of the I mean, to be fair, the UK had British Airways and Concorde, but in terms of international travel, American Airlines were, it was. I guess it's because of the culture, and we'll get to that because that's an integral part of everything you've been involved in. But when I think of a 70s and 80s TV, from the streets of San Francisco to Magnum, and you just everything was those Lincolns and airlines.
Yeah. I mentioned my dad was in the Air Force, and my first flight on a plane was when he was stationed at Luke Air Force Base, which is outside Phoenix. Um, he had to go down to Tucson for tour duty, and and he took me with him, and we sat up we flew in a cargo plane, okay, and the pilots had my dad was not a pilot, he was a sergeant in the Air Force, but the pilots had me come up and sit in the front and handle the controls and
Yeah,
stuff.
I know.
I was
Could you
9.
imagine telling somebody that today?
Yeah, that would not happen today. Yeah, no, it was fun, and it was from Phoenix to Tucson is less than a puddle jump. It was very
Yeah,
quick. We were there very quickly, and but they would shuttle planes back and forth between Luke and Montham. Is it Montham? No, Davis Montham. I forget what it's called, but the Tucson Air Force Base. And that's why we got to ride. But the commercial airline, I did when my dad was stationed in Greece. Uh, we had I was we were stationed at that time in Washington State at Tacoma, and my parents had gone on ahead. They drove the car there to New York. I'm sorry, to New York, and then I was going to fly by myself, and I did, I even then, even though I'd seen movies about pilots and stuff, the idea that I could get on a plane and fly. In those days, they didn't go totally cross country. They stopped in Chicago to refuel, and then on to New York. It was a fascinating experience. Once again, we're back to the thing of
it's
people don't appreciate what
no,
they've
but it
got.
was such an amazing adventure, and I love these conversations because yourself and myself, we saw these changes in technology and the infrastructure of our countries. And one of the things that's fascinating is because of I'm 50 in a couple of months, so I do remember my grandfather, and my mum's side of that are all from Ireland. My mum was born in Ireland, down in County Wexford, and so there's these stories that I remember and things I remember, and I've mentioned it before on here when I used to go over to Ireland with my nan, and we'd go to the house in Kilmarnock where she was from, and when I was a kid especially, there was this walk that we used to go to do to see her sister Betty, and we'd do this walk probably twice a day if she couldn't get a lift from somebody passing by. And as we got to a point on a crossroads, there was this hand pump. And I cannot tell you how many times I heard the story about how they used to have to go there every morning before school, and they never wore shoes because they were too poor. Right? And those stories, like, my nan came from a household that went to collect water from a pump every morning before school, before chores, before anything, with no shoes, and it was perfectly normal. And now she's taken her grandson past, who's moaning because he's tired because he's been walking everywhere all day.
Yeah. Well, in the book, in Crazy Hook, it had technology, the technology that David and RJ are become accustomed to, is gone, and they live more like what you just described, and that was fun for me to play that to build a society that had a little bit of our world in it, because our world didn't totally disappear in the novel, but they had to in many ways go back to those kind of things. It was kind of fun to fit that in and explore it and ask what the consequences of that is for a tribe of people.
So, because with your book Crazy Hawk, when did you first get the idea or the concept for it? Because the bio I've got, you have quite it's quite a bio of things you've written and been involved in writing. So, when did that concept come? We'll get to the rest of it later.
Yeah. As I spoke, riding my horse around the valley, I wanted to write something that my horse would be one of the heroes. And in the book, the relationship between Deirdre, the main character, and her horse Danny is a major spiritual theme in the book. And I wanted to capture this valley, or a somewhat fictionalized version of this valley. And but the concept of doing a post-apocalyptic world really came to me in college when I read A Canticle for Leibowitz. I don't know, by Walter Miller. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Classic post-apocalyptic novel. And in that, my novel in that is, they're really not very similar at all, except for one thing. That world takes place in a post-atomic nuclear war world, totally destroyed in Canticle for Leibowitz. And one of the main characters discovers an underground shelter that's totally intact from from our world, from the 20th century, and the things that he finds there in still intact, and like articles and handwriting and stuff, stimulates him so much, and he's fascinated with what the world was like before the apocalypse. And that's something that I wanted to make sure I dramatize too. And that's the thing that I've thought about for years, is how interesting it is. The world she's writing through on her adventure is our world ruined. Yeah. And so there are ruins everywhere. And so she's finding things about our world, and she's structuring an idea of what our world was. Now, she's not always right. She's very confused about this cloud where we stored information. Was it really in the sky? But everything she finds, she reads and studies. So it's a fun, you can make this sort of chilling, barren world in the future, a post-apocalyptic world. But at the same time, you can reflect on our society through the eyes of my main character.
Because that's, I just had a thought when you mentioned about the cloud, because You can imagine if there's an apocalyptic world, right? Somebody just still know how to read or write, but they come across a children's book and it has a picture of a cloud. So they know what a cloud is. So somehow they have that education. And then they come across something else and everyone talks about how they download from the cloud or upload to the cloud. And everything is stored in the cloud. And how does this person separate this image of we store, that technology was so great that we stored it in a cloud?
That's what we do with it. And she's even asked, she's recognized as someone who's really, learned a lot about the world before the breakdown. The breakdown is a global collapse of the world order triggered by wars and a terrible virus and civil wars and things. So they're not even sure how long ago that was. They're guessing about 100 years. And so she's known as the person who's really boned up on that by reading all the things she finds when she rides around. And one of the other characters said, "Well, was it a real cloud?" And she doesn't know the answer to that. It says, "I don't think so. It had something to do with satellites, I think." And she's not even sure what a satellite is. So
I remember reading this theory once that if you can imagine, like you say, like an apocalyptic world, and at some point during the apocalyptic world, somebody sees planes flying overhead, most likely fighter jets, afterburners and stuff like that. They said, but by the time you get down about 3 generations of stories, you've just discovered dragons.
Yeah.
But to you and I, they're F-15s, they're Tomahawks.
No question of that. I one of I have her Deirdre is a part of a tribe called the Hussars, and in the they're raiders. They ride horses, and that's their primary function. Is they also raise horses and sell them and stuff. But one of the things I wanted to play with was, what do they do spiritually? Because I'm absolutely convinced that we need a spiritual life. We need an inner life. And so I came up with this idea that it's really almost a sophisticated form of animism, that they think the wild animals are all spirits, and particularly an animal that might come close to their world without any aggression. They think is that's a spirit that's trying to communicate with us, and certainly that is, I think, a totally credible way that a society might evolve, particularly if it's somewhat isolated from the rest of the world.
Well, because I mean, pretty much every society that I've ever known about has some evolution of spirituality in some form. There's always something or someone that is worshipped somehow, and that worshipping process always seems to either be some form of gratitude in the hope of getting something in return, or something they don't understand, so the worship is a form of appeasement. Hopefully this makes you happy.
I didn't hear that last time. Worship in the form of what?
Yeah. So they often, if it's not for gratitude in the hope of receiving something, it's some form of appeasement in the hope that that they don't anger it in some way.
Yes. Look, I think even very sophisticated modern materialists have a little bit of that in them. I talk to some people who would think of themselves as very much materialists, not into a spiritual world at all. And yet, you talk to them enough, and they have things that they're looking not to piss off the gods or whatever. So I've loved. It's just one of my lifetime fascinations with different spiritual traditions. When I was in college, I got heavily into Stoicism, and I love the fact that seems to be coming back. I don't know if you realize this. Titus and Marcus Aurelius and Seneca are suddenly, have all this presence, at least in American bookstores. We see their books everywhere. And
as a side thing, I have a sort of part-time work where I do a lot of coaching, and I'm a certified hypnotherapist. So, and sometimes people talk to me and they're like about stoicism and stuff like that, and then there's something tragic going on in their life, and the first thing I always say to them is, "How's that working out for you?" And I said, because like a lot of these things, and I actually have a big appreciation for stoicism, but you have to understand that the people that wrote this were in their time incredibly intelligent. The first sign that we have of that is they could read and write, and
right.
and they were talking about points of view from a different time. They weren't writing. If they were going to write their stoicism today, one of the first things they'd say is, "Don't own a smartphone. It's just going to corrupt your mind." You know, don't watch.
I think, though, that there is value in ancient, or not necessarily ancient, like thousands of years, but older worldviews and spirituality, even though clearly they need to be adapted to our current situation. But there's value in there because it's a different perspective, I have friends and family members who I beg them to just change your perspective a bit. Things aren't as bad as you think. You could really regenerate yourself. So that's one thing an older spiritual tradition can give you. You're thinking about the world in a different way.
Because one of the takes I have with stoicism is, and this actually, I won't mention the person's name, but I was talking to him when he was going through a really bad breakup, is stoicism was never about control your thoughts. Because when you're heartbroken and feeling distraught and you need to figure out and grieve, that stoicism wasn't a counter to that. Stoicism was a discipline and a reminder to the men and women around them in your everyday life. You should be conscious and aware of this, and not allow thoughts that don't have any real meaning to overrule you. And you have to also kind of take on board that today's romance and love, as we know it, it's a modern concept. 200 years ago, even if you were kind of free, your marriage was, if you lived in America 200 years ago, you didn't get to marry who you wanted out of romance. You married the.
It was either out of necessity or an arrangement.
There you go. Romance had nothing to do with it.
No.
It's a purely modern.
Another thing that's dated about Stoicism that I don't think I question whether it even worked back in those days is the thing really taken from Stoicism by other traditions. Alcoholics Anonymous uses it. Don't worry about the thing you can't control. But the problem with that, what if the crisis in your life is created by a mistake you made?
Yeah.
Well, what Stoicism doesn't speak to that. No. Like if I make a terrible mistake on the road and I have an accident, somebody is seriously hurt and stuff, and it was definitely my fault, where does Stoicism come in and say, you only worry about the things you can control? Oh, well, I could have controlled my driving. I could have, not switched lanes at that moment. And so, I would say that almost every spiritual tradition, every psychological tradition, every therapeutic tradition has a limitation, has something that doesn't quite work.
Yeah, because I look at some of the Stoicism writings that I've read and stuff, and I think and these people were some of the leading thinkers of their time, and some of the leading leaders of their time. They were extraordinary men, and what I imagine is what you have is this: they've written down their thoughts of what they've learnt through life. And not actually what they practiced from the day they were born. It's just like, now I'm a say 60-year-old successful Roman. This is these are the lessons I've learned, and I'm putting them down. And maybe if you read them, you can seek the same lessons and get the same understandings that I got. But I think with some of it, like I said, when people end up in financial trouble and they're going to lose their houses, don't trouble about the things you can't control. Well, it's pretty troubling. The wife and kids are pretty pissed right now, and I'm being kicked out of the house with no money in the bank.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I'm not today a Stoic. I had mentioned.
I do think it's something people should read.
Yeah, yeah. I also believe the great religions, Christianity and
Yeah,
Hinduism and Buddhism, have all kinds of spiritual, particularly the mystical traditions. Have I've read recently Teresa of Avila, I think is the way you pronounce that Spanish town. My wife and I visited it, and when we went there, and she talks about one of her things is to not be of the world. Now, what just as we were critiquing the Stoics, it's not realistic to not be of the world, but I
mm,
understood what she was getting at
yeah,
is if all your values are about what other people think of you or what the weather is, or and you don't have anything clicking inside, you can the French philosopher Chamfort. He's an epigrammist. He has a quote. I'll paraphrase it. Is that it's happiness is very difficult to find in yourself and impossible to find anywhere else.
I like
And
that.
very meaningful to me. I have it written on all the different stuff, and that's what Teresa's getting at too. Is
Yeah,
that if you're about the world, if the debate, the presidential debate, becomes all like something that
yeah.
consumes, it's I got to have a life inside of me where there are values. And I think that's what the great religions give us is another way of looking at the world that's that in the matter of degrees, not all of them are is equally inspiring, but that I find very meaningful.
No, I completely agree because I think when I've looked at religions, it doesn't. And my mum was Irish, born in County Wexford, so I was raised as an Irish Catholic, and when my take on all of these things, whenever I've looked at any religion, if you take them down to their foundations, their basic principles, they're almost identical. They all roughly have the same message, and it will be, you know, if you're not sure of something, sit down in silence and contemplate and pray. Take care of your community, be respectful of your neighbours, don't be lazy, and don't be greedy. You know, enjoy your rewards, but not at the expense of somebody else. It's really simple stuff on every level that we all struggle with and struggle to do. And that's what I think Stoicism was dealing with as well.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. That the prayer you mentioned prayer. I think I read the quote recently. I'm not going to remember who said it, Kierkegaard maybe or somebody like that. That prayer really is, I mean, he was a believing Christian, so I'm not saying that he was dismissing God, but he was saying prayer really isn't about God. It's about you.
Yeah,
It's about what the effect it has on you. How it changes your makeup. So in a sense, your prayer is being answered just by the act of praying because it's therapeutic. It's healing you in a certain way.
it is. Because I think I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about me getting stressed at my day job. And then I was saying to him, I was reminding myself because back in my 20s, I got into trouble with the law. I ended up bankrupt and stuff like that. And I was saying to this guy that I was talking to, if I could put that version of me in his actually be in his early 30s, he had just turned 30 when it all finished, and told him that today I had this job and I have this podcast and I do hypnosis and I help these people and I drive a BMW and all of this, he would be doing cartwheels for a week. He would be so excited and so happy, and I'm bitching about it. I
Right.
literally have the dream, but I've lost all kind of concept of how. And I think that's one of the great benefits of meditation or prayer is when you sit down and just pause. Like if you're probably just when you were riding a horse through the valley, and you just probably realize at some point you just like, oh wow, I haven't thought about anything, so I'm just caught up in the moment of the beauty in front of me.
Yeah, that's horseback riding in particular is if you have a good horse. I always that's
Yeah,
always a qualification. But if you have a good reliable trail horse, it's one of the somebody a friend of mine always says there's no such thing as a bad trail ride. Of course, if you fall off or something, that could be bad. But as long as you get back without getting hurt, there's no such thing. And because of the beauty of the communion with the animal, uh, and uh, and and also too, this is something that back in the day we were just talking about.
yeah,
People had to ride 60 miles in a day and stuff. Aware of the fact that for us it's a pure pleasure. Matter of fact, they used to call it pleasure riding. I think I read a letter by Jonathan Swift in which he talks about his Samuel Johnson, not Jonathan Swift. It was in an auction, and I was going through the catalog, and I read the letter, and he talks about he's urging his sick friend to get back out on horseback. Go riding. It's good for you. It's kind of like what we talk today about walking.
yeah.
Everybody's go for a walk. In those days it was get on a horse and just go because it was as accessible. The act of horseback riding was as accessible in those days as walking is to us because everybody had a horse
Yeah. But there's a therapy to any form of kind of detachment from the things that nag you and going off to a point where you're away long enough and it's quiet enough that you remember where to be grateful.
Yeah, even in Samuel Johnson's time, cities could be crushing.
Yeah.
Cities have as stimulating as they are, and as much as the great thing about cities is it's much more difficult to be lonely in a city. I mean, you can be lonely in a city, of course. That's
Yeah.
obvious if you don't have friends and socialize. But if you don't want to be lonely, you just go out and you're interrelating with people, and that's a good thing about cities. But there's also so much. It's so difficult to get. There's a famous Yeats poem about the Lake of Innisfree where he's standing in a city thinking about that lake, and that's what's keeping him sane. I wish I knew more of it, but um, uh, and when we bought a cabin in Arizona before we bought this ranch, and this is when I was working in Los Angeles, and I would think about that cabin all the time, and I would
Yeah.
do some meditation. Almost escapism.
Yeah.
Uh, to think of that place where when you're in a pressurized job and also stuck in traffic and cities there are some beautiful cities, a lot
Oh
of
yeah,
cities are
yeah, of
beautiful
course, of
cities.
course. Um,
There's always a pressure that comes with the city that you lose when you go into the rural world. And I could never live in a city again. I guess as I get older, maybe that I need to one day. But I'm a total believer in rural life.
yeah, yeah. Where did writing start for you?
When I began writing,
Just where, was it something that you started when you were 6 years old with short stories, or just?
yeah, maybe because my dad was my greatest father on earth. He used to make up whatever comic book or ever thing I was into. He would make up an extended version of it. So the Peanuts cartoons. I used to collect the books that had the collection of Peanuts cartoons, Charlie Brown, and all this stuff. He would make up a story that had Charlie Brown and Schroeder and Lucy in it. The Disney. I have a letter from him that is he wrote me a Mickey Mouse story. Mickey Mouse and Goofy. So I would start imitating him, what he would do. Keep in mind, he was a sergeant in the Air Force working on base supply and stuff. But he had that creative side to him. And so, yeah, I was, but the time where I really got into it was when my dad was stationed in Greece. The teacher said, we went to an American school in Greece. a lot of Greek kids were in the school with us, but it was basically an American school taught in English. And he said, the teacher said, I'll write a short story. I'll give you extra credit. I was about 13 years old at the time. I wrote a short story every week for the rest of the year. And he had to come up to me and says, I'm not giving you extra credit for all these stories. And I said, no, I know. Just read them and tell me what you think. Because they're like 4 pages long,
Yeah.
They're all based on like Alistair MacLean novels or the latest movie I saw or something. So yeah, I started thinking of myself as a writer pretty early. I also, when I was in college, I was also an actor. And I came to Hollywood originally as an actor. That was my original thing. But that writing thing kept surfacing, and I wasn't long before, because of course, a great actor uses their whole body as a tool and stuff. But I felt that more of myself was being used in writing than in acting. For me personally, I'm not saying that's true.
Did that teacher that you kept writing the short stories for, did they encourage it? Even though they said, well, you're not getting it.
Oh yeah. At first, and then when it became like a burden, he had to read it every week. He said, you write cool stories, but I don't need to read anymore. Kind of thing, because there probably was a repetition of some heroic manly man, something. I loved Alistair when I was 13 years old. Alistair MacLean, you remember him? Guns of Navarone and Ice Zebra, Scottish writer. I've read him the last few years, just going back nostalgically to read him. Wonderful action and thing. It's interesting. It's a style that you don't see a lot today, because it's so much head hopping and different things. So there's a sort of a surface psychological study. He does talk about people's feelings, but doesn't go very deeply into it, because his whole motive is to keep the story going. So it's anyway.
You saying that I don't know why it triggered this memory, but my friend and I, Duncan, every September we go abroad for couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks, and we go surfing. And just lately, since the lockdowns and pandemic, it's been France, which is how that original story that I was telling you before we started recording. I was in California surfing, and we do this thing called 80s movies night. So we get a load of 80s movies, put them on a laptop, take it with us, and because we're often in the middle of nowhere camping on a campsite, so all you can do is drink a couple of beers and watch a movie. So we focus on kind of 80s movies, because that's our childhood really, although we have started dipping into the 70s. And one of the things I talk about, I was telling him, is that there was this film called The Last Starfighter, and I was obsessed about watching this film again, because I loved it when I was a kid. And I said to him afterwards, this is one of the greatest films I've still ever seen. And the reason being is because what was great about the 80s is the film was done in about an hour and 20 minutes. It's just start to finish. It's just like, we're just going to push you through the whole story. He lived on a trailer park. Nobody knows why. Nobody cared. His dad wasn't there, and there was no deep, meaningful story about the loss of his dad or whatever, and he was raised by his mum. None of that. He's just an action hero who wins an arcade game and suddenly goes off and saves the world with an alien. And we just went from there to the finish.
Now that you're describing it, I remember it now.
Yeah. And there's no backstory. We didn't need to know anything. He had a girlfriend. There was a couple of relationship problems. They got over it without even going into how they got over it. It's just like, no, we're just going to, you could be in and out between breakfast and lunch. just kill a couple of hours and start of it. And I loved it just because of its pure, as you were saying, going back to like the books at Navarone and stuff. It's, you're aware of the problems. We don't need to spend 3 hours talking about them. We can just let's stick to the point of the film, stick to the point of the book. Let's just have a hero, and he'll do the job he needs to do. And at some point, you're going to shit yourself for a moment because you think he's not going to pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, Alistair MacLean was a master of that stuff.
Yeah.
You mentioned you were getting back into the 70s. You said that you were starting. I've recently got into the movies. So this is going to sound so obvious and like you didn't do this before, but I didn't. I got back into the movies of Steve McQueen,
Yeah.
major star, but for whatever reason, I didn't connect with him. I knew a guy who worked with him, and so I'd gotten some secondhand information about Steve McQueen. So I had an image in my head that's now I could care less about that image in my head. So I never got into it. So now I've gone back and watched Bullet and The Getaway and Junior Bonner and these movies, and I have a whole new appreciation for him. He was a special personality, a good actor, but more importantly, a great movie star.
Oh, just yeah. One of the films that from the 70s we watched, I think it had Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman. Was it All the President's Men? About the Watergate files.
That's right.
And
was that the 70s? Wow.
Yeah, but that film literally just ends with no warning. You're watching the film thinking something's about to happen, and it just finishes. And you just...
Yeah, I didn't remember that. I haven't seen it in a long time, but yeah, that was a...
Oh, it was great. Couldn't believe how good it was, because I haven't seen it since the 80s, you know.
I haven't seen it in a long time either. It was probably won awards too. I didn't think it did.
So where did it... So you said you went to California to become an actor, but found that actually you were just drawn to writing. So what was kind of like... What happened next, I suppose?
Well, I was working as a driver. I was a Teamster, actually, which I don't know why I said that. I like being in the Teamsters, but I wasn't like I was doing cross country hauling or something. I was a delivery guy. We were printing. I worked for a printing company, and we had a bobtail truck, a step van, and a Honda, a little Honda to drive around on. And I used to deliver to the studios. Okay. And this is where when I was starting to see myself as a writer, trying to break in, and I was started becoming a little starstruck when I don't think I was starstruck at first when I would drive on to Warner Brothers or Universal because I didn't know what to expect. But when at one point I was parked out, I had to pick up artwork at Malpeso, which is Clint Eastwood's company, and so they told me to wait there. I had the Honda. And they told me to wait there, and I put my chair back so catch a little sleep, and the car moves a little bit, and I look up, and Clint Eastwood was sitting on the hood of my car, and I'm listening to his conversations. Nothing particularly interesting. It's about hiring somebody, and he was talking to probably a producer or an associate producer or something, and I went on. I was just riveted by that conversation, and I guess I love Clint Eastwood. And the guy he was talking to suddenly notices I'm there and points it out to Clint. And Clint backs up and says, "I'm sorry, man. You should have said something." And he said, "No, I'm waiting for some artwork from your office." And she says, "Well, go in and have a cup of coffee. Don't wait out here. You're going to go in." And so it sounds like nothing now. But at the time, it was such a big deal for me. And ran into other people. I was on an elevator once with the actor Robert Blake, who had a show on at that time, Beretta, and chatted him up a little bit. So anyway, that sample of Hollywood started stimulating me to really get into this. So I started writing screenplays, and I wrote one called Good Company, which was about a guy who drives around LA who aspires to be a writer. So it was about me and my family. And a guy named Glenn Caron, who was the supervising producer of a show called Remington Steele, read it and brought me in to be the cubby writer on that show. And that began my career. I learned so much from him and that whole world there.
What? So you were writing on Remington Steele?
Oh yes, absolutely. That's what it was. My
fucking awesome
beginning of my career was Remington Steele. Interesting thing is when they called me in, they gave me. Well, they had me, they sat me down and showed me the first episode, the pilot, and then they said, "We want your honest opinion. It does us no good unless you be honest." And of course, many years later, I realized that's not totally true. They don't always want your honest opinion, but at that point, I totally bought in, and I said, terrific writing, wonderful concept. If you remember, the concept was Laura Holt, played by Stephanie Zimbalist, had a detective agency, but she wasn't getting enough work because of prejudice against a woman private detective. So she gets this phony, Remington Steele, to be the front of the thing, and that worked wonderfully. And they went away from that as Pierce became more popular, as the show got more successful. But that worked. But my reaction was, when they asked me to look at it, I said, "It's great, love this concept, all stuff." But that guy Pierce, the guy Remington, he's got to do more. He's the star of the show.
Yeah.
And of course, they didn't see it that way. They saw it as Laura Holt's show, as Stephanie Zimbalist's show. But look, I was not like a prophet or something. I was just reacting to the show the way the whole world reacted to it a month later when it aired. So because Pierce became a major star from that.
Well, yeah. I mean, he went on to become James Bond.
Yes, and nice guy. I really liked him. He flirted with my wife shamefully every time we saw him.
I imagine he shamefully flirts with everybody's wife. So, I mean, I can imagine that's kind of his playful way of, because it must be. I think it's an interesting world. It's obviously evolved because of social media and the internet. But when you're Pierce Brosnan in Remington Steele, which for a period of time was one of the biggest shows in America, and was in God knows how many countries, it must affect your head, even if you're the most down to earth, grounded person. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't not know who you are. So,
yeah. Actors who make it big, they have a whole different burden to carry. And I don't want to overstate it. Obviously, it's a very wonderful position to be in.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
All the poor movie stars.
No, but it doesn't mean it doesn't make it easy, does it?
There is the abyss right in front of them. They got there. Are they going to fall into the abyss of nothingness? And then that everybody who has a successful career, worries about it going away. But that most of us, is for a financial thing or self-esteem thing. With an actor, a famous actor who's made it big, like Pierce did with Remington Steele, there's something else that would disappear if. So I think there's an insecurity there in the celebrities or the major stars I work with that drives them to a little nuttiness. As for them, if you're not serving the stardom correctly, they can get pretty rough.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I think like I said, I can only try to imagine from different personality types, and I can imagine it if you're naturally a little bit introverted, but you're this big star. There's always going to be an expectation when people meet you that you're supposed to live up to, regardless of the mood you're in. And but if you're also actually quite a naturally friendly, extroverted person, that I would imagine there is an alter ego that develops when you do meet people, a sort of, not quite, do you know who I am? But when somebody clearly does know who you are, it's almost like opening a door that permits you to be playful with it and enjoy it and say, I'm Remington Steele, And I say that because I think I'd be like that. I think I would be like that.
I don't know what happened after I left the show. Glenn Caron, who's hired me, he left the show after the first season. I went with him to work on stuff with him. But certainly the year that I spent seeing Pierce every day, he was the most charming, friendly guy, very supportive of everything. But that was when he was just becoming a star. He's just, it must have been, I think there's that honeymoon period. Once again, everybody has that in their profession. If they went to a period of struggling and then they're successful, you have a sort of this feels good. And so he had that, So I don't know what kind of pressures he faced later on. It was interesting. Stephanie, who lovely woman, Stephanie Zimbalist, who played Laura Holt, who both the producers and the studio saw as the star of the show, and then watched Pierce become very much the star of the show. I I think there was a whole other crisis she was going in through. I mean, once again, she's on a hit show for, 5, 6 years. Nothing to be embarrassed about. That was good. She was terrific in the part, and she's a lovely person. And yet I'm sure somewhere he came to my office once and said, "I'm tired of being a pack mule for the plot." Basically, the subtext was, "I'm tired of Pierce getting all the cool stuff."
Yeah.
But we went with the crowd. There was something called TVQ in those days, where we had evaluated which person got the most attention. It was always Pierce that was kicking butt.
I remember, crikey, I'm trying to remember when I read this, but some years ago I wrote a book, and in learning to write that book, it actually came from a screenplay that I wrote it. But I did the usual thing where you read in every article you can, trying to discover how people learn to write and what it's about. And that came from doing some creative writing classes and stuff. And I always remember, I can never remember his name, but this gentleman was talking about there's two types of writers. He says, and he talked about one of his best friends. And he said he currently is working in Hollywood, and he will write something. And if a producer or a director comes along and says, I want it to be like this, he's like, yeah, absolutely. I'll change it. No problem at all. He says, where I can't do that. So how I write it is how it is. He says, and he was really honest. He said, I'm struggling for work. My friend has 3 houses and is still working in Hollywood. He said, choose what writer you want to be. And immediately I was like, I'd write something and you can change it to whatever you want. I know.
Yeah. I certainly was more like, I wasn't out. I didn't, from 82, 81, when I started working on Remington, to 2003, when I retired, I was never out of work. And one of the reasons is I knew how to work with people and give them what they want.
I think
sometimes you have to say, though, I got to say, sometimes you have to say, no, that will ruin the movie.
Oh, yeah.
If they want to fire you, they'll fire you, because that happens too.
But I think that's his lesson.
Within reason, you have to, especially really bad if they come up with a good idea and you resist it because I've seen people do that. It's very self-destructive. That will not work.
Well, because that was his message.
A producer might come to me with notes, and he gives me 11 notes, and 4 of them are horrible that I wouldn't do. They could fire me if they want to do that, and 3 of them are really good. I can't wait to go do them, and then the rest are So I figure out a bland way to do those that won't hurt. So. But there's ways to do it without being a total prostitute.
Yeah, well, because I think his message at the end was, you have to choose what you want to be. You can be cooperative and get paid, or you can be an artist. And I just
one of the reasons I wrote this novel is because I wanted to write something that was just mine. It's just mine, and I'm not taking notes or I published it myself, and that was the goal of writing the book. The personal goal. I mean, the artistic goal was to write a terrific novel, and but the desire to just express myself and not go through that. It's not that's such a terrible hassle.
No, but it's that independent project, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it feels good. And there's the desire of every screenwriter is to have a director come take the script away from them and make a movie, and literally hundreds of people are working on that movie and affecting it. And so, but the novelist gets to write the book he wants to write. So, that's a
really interesting point, because, like I say, as a screenwriter, I'd say to be a successful screenwriter, to be an employed one, you have to really understand the concept of cooperation. Whereas when you're sitting at your desk doing a novel for yourself, the only cooperation you need is between yourself and the development of the characters. And it's kind of that, I suppose, that relationship you develop as you start putting it down, where you have that inner agreement that you're going to try and make the most and get the most out of them, for them as much as for yourself. But no one else is ever going to see it until it's finished to offer an opinion of how they want it.
Yeah, that's right. That was total novel experience, and I'm delighted that people like the book. And um, yeah, no, it was utterly different. You also are hired occasionally to rewrite other people's work. I was hired to do a rewrite on Waterworld, Kevin Costner's movie, and worked directly with Kevin on it. And that was an interesting experience. But when you're doing something like that, you see what the original writer's vision was, and I hear what Kevin's vision is. And actually, the original writer, although had a wonderful beginning, I don't know if you know Waterworld,
Yeah,
the
I've seen it.
scene where where he drinks his urine. Uh, that's that's the opening scene of the movie. That was in the script that I was brought in to do a rewrite on. And when people ask me when I went in for meetings, what did you think of the script? And I said, well, God, I love that page one. And Kevin said, you're right. Page one is great. So this is a page two rewrite. We don't like anything after that. So but it is interesting how do like in that particular case, I tried to read the script and see what the guy's original intention was. Not to be loyal to him. My loyalty was to Costner. He's the one paying me. But to see what his image was, what his vision was, and how I could what was good about the vision and how I could keep that and make that work. There were several writers in that movie, so I mean that was not I was not the last word on that movie by any means, but it was an interesting challenge. So that's a whole different thing. You're taking somebody else's work, right, and you're taking notes and of a new vision, but using, like I said, literally page one we kept and then went from there. And it's always a challenging thing.
So
I'm interested to see Kevin's new movie. He's got these Western out. It's going to be a two-parter. I forget what it's called. But that should be interesting. He wrote. I think he collaborated on the script, but he definitely directed it.
yeah, Kevin's done some interesting films. I think the first time I really remember him was in The Untouchables when he played Elliot Ness.
Yeah. Well, I was working with somebody when he first started. I was working with Michael Phillips, who famous won an Academy Award for The Sting and produced Close Encounters of the Third Kind, lots of wonderful things. And he was connected with everybody in Hollywood. And a movie came out just right before I was working with Michael called the Big Chill. Was it The Big Chill? Or yeah, I don't recall the name of it, but there were a lot of it was about people from college people had gone to college together, coming back for a funeral. And in the original cut, which I never saw, Kevin Costner played the guy who died. So whenever they would do a flashback, Kevin Costner, it would have been his first big part. And but as they went on, they decided that the producers. I'm getting the story from Michael Phillips told. The producers made the decision to not go back to the flashbacks. To let's keep it in the present and just. And so his big break, right, was cut out of the movie, and certainly didn't slow him down because the next year it came out Silverado, which is a Western. I believe that was the first time he jumped into our minds, and then Untouchables, and amazing career he had.
Yeah.
Still going on.
Yeah, well, he's what's it? Oh, crikey, what's that? Yellowstone, isn't it? He's just done that successful.
Yellowstone.
Yeah.
Here's this is my own little neurotic thing. The opening scene of episode 1 of Yellowstone has this catastrophic accident in which a horse is pierced. Kevin Costner's character has a car accident, and when he goes back to check the horse trial, the horse is pierced by something and obviously is dying. And so the opening scene is Kevin mercy killing this suffering animal. I just couldn't go any further than that. It just was so disturbing to me because anybody who has horses knows when you take them in a trailer, you know, it's scary because they
Yeah.
they're
So I've never seen Yellowstone. So here's a thing that people won't know about me. I love films, but I don't like sitcoms or TV series or anything like that. And I discovered there's a strange reason why, because growing up as a kid, I loved them all, you know. But as an adult, what I discovered is I like films because they finish. Whereas,
yeah, that's true.
and what I noticed, like, because things now have like 6, 7, 8, 9 series, and unless it was something like the Golden Girls, which is really you're just looking at these 4 women and their relationship and whatever they get up to.
Yeah.
Um, everything there's always has to be some drama, and it kind of always has that forced feeling, and
Particularly today is
yeah,
everything's serialized today, and the reason for that is because of streaming and
yeah,
it was the box sets and stuff. You can see the whole series, whereas back in the day, like when we were doing Remington or even Xena, when I did Xena Warrior Princess, the each episode had to stand on its own because the big money was in second run syndication, or no, first run syndication, where you'd sell it to a syndication. It would be on in the afternoon when you can,
yeah,
I remember when I got from school and there'd be reruns of Maverick or something I'd watch. But people didn't in those days didn't watch the whole series, so if you had a lot of to be continueds or stuff, it wouldn't do as well. And so there's no question today. Almost everything is serialized.
yeah.
You have to know what happened in episode 1 to understand what happened in episode 3. Whereas that was not the goal of TV. Well, I'd say through the 90s and into the 21st century, that was not
But
the goal.
I always find when you get towards the end of a season, the one that always stands out to me is Sons of Anarchy. I decided because everyone was on about it, I'd start watching it. And in the last episode before the season,
Which one? What are we doing?
Sons of Anarchy.
Oh, Sons of Anarchy. Right?
The guy, like I said, I can't remember the character's name, but he has to go and kill one of the guys, and he rolls up alongside him, doesn't know who's driving the pickup, and it happens to be his wife, and he pulls the trigger and shoots anyway. And I thought, no professional hitman would ever do that. They'd never just blindly shoot into a vehicle. And it's like you've created a story for the sake of I need a story for it to follow on into the next season, and
Yeah.
and it's just like you should have. I don't know what you're supposed to do, but when I think of a hitman and proper hitmen and stuff like that, they don't just, is that the person? Is that not the person? Are they in the vehicle? Are they not in the vehicle? Do you know what? I'll pull the trigger anyway and just shoot who's ever in there. They just, it's not what they would do. and of course, and they're all, a lot of them, for the reasons you've mentioned, are guilty of, I have to have a drama to go into the next. Whereas you could have actually just ended that series before he pulled the trigger. And will he shoot next time? Will he shoot? Will he realise it's her? And start the thing as he could have actually just recognised it. Or he could have realised it was her and shot her anyway out of spite. You could have turned the character into something. And I just thought it was incredibly pointless.
That's a good point. I'm not even arguing that. But in defense of the TV writer, there is
he's got a paycheck to pick up. Do as you're told.
To have that cliffhanger, that thing that draws you back the next year.
But yeah, because to me the natural. By the way, the unemployed, no one's ever paid him to write guy has an opinion on somebody who does it for a living, right?
Absolutely.
Just to put that little caveat in there. To me, the cliffhanger should have been: does he pull the trigger or not?
Yeah, no, you're right. I don't disagree with that.
But so one thing, because I'm conscious of time, I've overrun for you, and I do apologise. Is
I'm really enjoying this. So
thank you. Thank you. One thing, I've always had this theory about sequels because they're typically quite bad, and there are exceptions to the rule. But my theory has always been the reason sequels are never as good is because they were never part of the original story. So somebody writes a story, and it does really well in the box office, say, and somebody's like, we need to carry this on. And my idea has always been the reason they're never as good is because it was never part of the original thinking of the writer. So
Yes.
what you're watching is an afterthought.
Yeah. Well, I did write one sequel. It was called Major League 2. It was a sequel to the movie Major League.
Yeah.
We didn't have that problem because it was about a baseball team. What are you going to do in the second
Yes.
thing? Take the guns and have their own. They have to do the same thing they did in the first one.
Yeah.
So they can't now become pirates or something. So they I saw a review of it recently. I wrote the script in the '90s. I think it was released in '93, and it got bombed in reviews. It actually did pretty well at the box office. But one of the things that was an issue is how do you tell the same story? It's pretty much the same story, except this time they're not going to lose in the end. They're going to go on to the World Series.
Yeah.
It was progress within the team, and it was, to me, all about character. You had to have something happen different to each character because you can't really reinvent the baseball team in any kind of, because they're playing baseball every day. They're not going to do something totally different. So that was a lesson. There was something happened last minute, right as principal photography was beginning. The studio wanted to add a character, and that kind of didn't happen. But I talked to baseball fans. This is a movie that movie people don't like, but baseball fans love.
So how do you handle that then? Because you said it did well at the box office, but sort of slammed a bit by the critics or the reviews. Does that affect you?
Well, how do I handle bad reviews?
Well, no, does it affect you? Because some people will just be, I did what I did, and if you didn't enjoy it, you didn't.
No, it hurt the following weekend because I think some of it was unfair. I didn't. I still like that movie. I mean, I wrote a book about the series, the Major League series, and he said. He quoted me. I did the same line I did to you. Like, what are they supposed to take the guns of Navarone in season? The sequel. But he said that he didn't quote what I wanted him to say. Is that I like the movie. So, and I know people who like the movie. I met the great Willie Mays, who just passed very recently. Yeah. Passed away. He's an American baseball player and a childhood hero of mine. And he heard I wrote Major League 2, and he was just very complimentary about it. He loved the movie. So, like I said, baseball people like the movie. Movie people don't like the movie so much.
Yeah. Did it ever bother you if people gave bad reviews?
Sure, it bothers me when it happens, but I don't carry it with me. Got on to the next one. Good reviews feel real good. Like my novel got a really nice review from Kirkus Reviews, and I was very pleased with that. That feels great. So it's part of the thing, though. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. It's part of what.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because the thing is, and the thing is difficult, and this applies to anybody with any form of art, is that at some point you're really, and it's cliche, but you really are putting your heart and soul onto a piece of paper for someone else to come and look at and say whether they think it's shit or not. And
right.
And nobody intentionally writes something wanting it to be bad.
Right. That's true. That's true. Well, you even if I write the perfect screenplay, it needs a director and actors to interpret it. So there's an episode of Xena Warrior Princess that I wrote called Day in Life, which was very well received and the most popular episode. And I think immodestly, I will say it's a terrific teleplay, but needed the right director. And of course, I knew who the actresses were. In a TV series, you know who the actors are. That's a big advantage to writing in features where you don't know necessarily who's going to be cast. And so, even that one, that's a script I love for people to read and see what I wrote, that needed interpretation. And so the opposite is true too. Sometimes you write something and it's interpreted a certain way, and then by the actors in the thing, and you gotta live with it though. Your name's on it.
Yeah, for sure. But because Xena Princess Warrior is when that was first out, that even today I think it still has quite a big cult following.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was terrific. It was, you use cliches like ground breaking and stuff,
Oh,
but
but
it
it
was
was.
absolutely. There was we were on a contemporary with Buffy, so Buffy was doing sort of an urban modern version of it. We were doing the countrified,
Yeah.
great warrior from the ancient days, and uh, yeah, we it was very different. And Lucy, one of the great TV stars of all time, in my opinion. Lucy Lawless, what she did on that show.
But it was globally successful. Certainly, probably one of the first I remember for actually a female, as you know, like literally the Princess Warrior in that dominant role. Um, and it definitely, I'm sure it still must have, because like you mentioned Buffy, which was kind of the opposite, but that was, I mean, I was a huge Buffy fan. But the thing about Buffy, it's easier to make, weirdly, it's easier to make Buffy believable because it's supernatural. With Xena Princess Warrior, you're restricted to the mythology. You can't kind of make it too much, like. And what I mean is because with something like Buffy and vampires and stuff like that, you can almost make anything up. Nobody's going to care
Yeah,
because it's supernatural. And oh, this was a thing, because of this dark spell. We're just going to change all the roles of vampires. It's fine because there was some dark spell. But when you're dealing with mythology, and you can't do that, you can't just bring something new in. So it's I don't know. I think it's a harder concept to.
well, we actually had a rule on Xena, no magic, and well, of
Yeah,
course, you had supernatural stuff, and because there were gods who visited Xena, but we knew what we meant when we said no magic. We
yeah.
didn't want things like spells and stuff that. Yeah, no, that was. Yeah, I think whatever you do, like with my novel Crazy Hawk, I concentrate on trying to make the future as realistic as possible. Like, what would people do after an event like that, after a cataclysmic event that wiped out technology and stuff? And I think we did that with Xena as because one of the things about Xena was famous was the Hong Kong style of action. Where
Yeah.
she'd be suspended in air and kicking people and stuff. And so within that context, though, I wanted to have it, realistic as it could be within that world. And yeah, I know there's some series or books and two also where anything goes. It's just they make up stuff just out of
Hmm.
whole cloth. But it is better to have a structure, and the mythology. I know it's sort of odd to say mythology is a structure because they certainly the Greek mythology is an amazing product of the human imagination. But to have that as our guide rails was important.
Do you have any plans for another book?
Yeah, I am working on another one. It would be like a deep, like I told the Crazy Hawk takes place about 150 years in the future. I have an idea for one in the same world, but 1,000 years in the future, and the people in that world are aware of what Crazy Hawk did. Crazy Hawk has become like a mythical figure for them, and it's very much about. It's called the Mystic Wrangler, and it's very much what we were talking earlier about the
Yeah.
spirituality and the power of spirituality and what they learn in deep space because now the society. What I'm playing with in that one is the idea that now that there's been a rebirth of society and civilization, they're doing things different. I don't know if you're familiar with the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, but one of the things he did, I mean, it's hard to, I wouldn't say I'm a master of Immanuel Kant, but one thing I do understand, he said that we'll never know the thing as itself, the thing in itself. We'll only know what we perceive through our senses and stuff. And what I'm suggesting in that book that I'm writing now is that mystics are able to perceive the thing in itself, and that gives them this extra power, and that's where the concept begins.
I like that. I like that. Um, just lastly, because this is a random question I just enjoy asking people. So imagine, like literally, it's a magical world, so you can go back in time, any time, any place in history. Where would you go? Why would you go there? What car would you take with you? What would you be driving? And what music would you listen to?
Wow, that's a good one. Well, I don't want to seem like a cliched American, but I would go back to the Old West.
Perfect.
Uh, Hell, I'd drive a Mustang. Why not?
Nice.
And what music would I be listening to? The Frankie Lane record from the early 60s, maybe mid 60s, called, no, early 60s, I'm not there, called Hell Done for Leather. That was the name of the album. And the first song on it is Bullet in My Shoulder, Blood Running Down My Vest, 20 in the posse, and they're never going to let me rest. And then it goes off into the thing. I don't know if you know Frankie Lane, the American singer Frankie Lane. He had a really cool style. And that would probably be the music I'm listening to. Did I answer that sufficiently?
That's brilliant. More than I could have hoped for. Um, just everything. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time.
Okay, I had a good time. Thank you.
And there it is, Mr. R.J. Stewart and his book Crazy Hawk. And as always, I managed to talk about almost everything and not just the book. And for those that are learning about writing or the process of writing, I hope you were able to take some good points from that, some good hints. It's not a simple one solution fits all. And as always, thank you very much for listening, for watching. I do appreciate it. To everybody that comments, subscribes or shares or talks about the podcast. Genuinely, thank you. It is appreciated. And as always, wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please take care and be blessed.